Here. Mr. Rodriguez?
Present.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. Zupnik?
Present.
Mr. Cavallini?
Here.
Ms. Patras?
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News, the Courier News, and to all subscribers, and posted to the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 11, 2019.
Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We do have minutes from last week that we need approval. Do I hear a motion?
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes approved. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to talk about anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing nothing, we will close that portion for now. Paul, we have some applications need approval?
Yes,
right.
nothing additional has been submitted on Rilo case, so that still remains incomplete. We did receive additional information on the Villegas application. I wrote a letter dated December 9th. It had identified a number of waivers requested by the applicant. We recommended that those waivers be granted and the application be deemed complete, and we can schedule for a public hearing.
Okay, we need a roll call on that, Janine.
So there'll be a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry, we do need a motion.
Complete and to waive the remaining
Sorry.
items for completeness.
So
Yes.
moved. Seconded.
Mr. Strathoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Mr. Leonard?
Yeah, aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Mr. Cavallini?
Aye.
Ms. Patras?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Aye.
I don't know if you want to talk about a meeting date for that or not. I don't know when January meetings are.
Do you think we could put in our January
It's
meeting?
a relatively simple application, can be
I would
done
think
after
so.
reorganization, if the applicant can notice in time. I think Janine can let them know, get your notice in. If they can do it in time, then I think you can do it at the reorg meeting.
Yeah, okay. So
And
we'll...
what is the date of that?
January 9th,
January 9th, right. Okay,
2020.
right.
2020.
Okay, just to remind everybody that our reorg meeting is January 3rd for the township, and we will have our reorganization meeting on the 9th.
We'll only have that night, that month.
Only
Because
that
it's the
night,
second-
right.
third
Only
day.
one meeting in January, that's the second Thursday. Right. All right, I guess we're ready to have Elite, our application. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we talked about, this is Jeff Lehrer on behalf of the applicant, Elite Properties at Bedminster LLC. We had talked last meeting about Mr. Galvin starting and providing his closing argument. I just would like to say a few words at the beginning, and we'll certainly allow Mr. Galvin the opportunity to speak. I'd like to first say that I had provided on an expedited basis the transcript for the hearing last Thursday, and I wanted to make sure that the members of the board had read the transcript and that we have a full board that's eligible to vote this evening.
We do, Jeff. Both Kathy has certified that 2 meetings she missed. She has seen the videos and read the transcripts so that she's eligible. And so is Scott.
Reviewed the exhibits as well earlier this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, and Scott has also certified. So we do have a full board.
Okay, first I wanted to thank the chairwoman. I wanted to thank the board members, your professionals, and the public for participating in the past 4 hearings. I'm not going to say that it's been easy or even fun, but it certainly has been interesting and at times entertain it. During the past 4 hearings, we have listened intently to the issues presented by the board, by the board's professionals, and by the public. The common theme seems to be the massing of buildings to the west, and in the interest of moving this to a conclusion, which we believe will resolve several and many of the issues, if not all of the issues presented, I'm here tonight to present and prepare to present the following to the board for their consideration. Number one, my client is prepared to reduce the overall density of the project from 40 resident rental units to 33 total rental units, a reduction of 7 rental units. This will, of course, entail a modification to the site plan and to the architectural plans, perhaps. We will return to the board at another time for modified plans showing the plan with 33 rental units. Number two, we are seeking the height variance for both buildings as originally proposed. Number three, we are seeking the use variance to allow the mixed use as identified in our application. Number four, we're seeking to have the granting of the variance to exceed the 5,000 square foot maximum building size. We had actually noticed to exceed that requirement. As you're aware, both buildings exceed that 5,000 square feet. This will likely change during the site plan process if this board is inclined to grant the use and other D variance relief. We're seeking to increase the retail component just an additional 1,500 square feet for a total of 5,500 square feet of retail space. And then we have to show you during site plan that we have sufficient exterior parking in the current configuration for the slightly increased retail space, which will of course demonstrate during site plan review. And lastly, we're asking the board to bifurcate this application to allow the board to vote on the variances and the additional retail space this evening, and to then return to this board for site plan approval as permitted under Section 76B, and your attorney will tell you what that is, of the municipal land use law. So before Mr. Galvin came up to present his closing arguments, I wanted to provide you with the proposal that my client and I have spoke about at length over the past week, after having listened to all of the testimony, after having listened to all of the public comments and your professional comments. And without further ado, Madam Chair, I will sit down.
Okay. Mr. Gavin?
First, I heard of that change in the proposal, but my official position is, doesn't matter. We've heard the entire case. You should rule on it. I don't believe that it's in the public's interest to allow this case to be amended in the way that was just suggested. You should vote on the case that was presented. If it gets denied, the applicant certainly has a right to submit a new proposal in the future, one that might be more to your liking. So I don't know what the board's decision is going to be, but I would like to proceed to make my closing argument and have you vote.
Go right ahead.
I just reserve the right to provide my closing argument as well.
Absolutely.
I've tried to organize, wouldn't rattle on, okay? So excuse me if it's too organized, I guess. First thing I'd like to do also is thank you for your patience and thank you for your service to the public. I do appreciate the effort that all boards make. Joint boards have two natures. When hearing site plans and subdivisions, you're a planning board. And you sometimes make policy decisions when you craft a master plan. But when you are presented with a D variance, you are not permitted to apply policy considerations or concerns. You must determine if the facts, when applied to the law, justify the grant of the variance. The VN zone district permits detached single-family dwellings. The proposed multifamily use is not a permitted use in the zone. A use variance is the most difficult standard of proof to meet. It requires the applicant to show the application will be a benefit to the general welfare. While in this case the applicant offered several special reasons, in our view, we are hard-pressed to find that those benefits would be any more than which would be expected if the site was developed as zoned. In fact, the applicant's planner agreed that this case was not inherently beneficial and was not being sought due to any hardship in the development of this property. The second consideration the board has to make as a zoning board is what are the negative impacts from this proposal. There are two prongs to the negative criteria. The first prong of the negative criteria, you must consider what the substantial negative impacts are on the surrounding property owners. We suggest there are several. The neighbors on the cul-de-sac will see the buildings. That's what the pictures show us. The look of these buildings along Lamington Road will be formidable and will be contrary to the Lamington Road streetscape. The number of residential units will be double the number of residential units allowed, assuming you build single-family homes on these acres. This will increase traffic along Lamington Road, will increase the noise from the activity, and double the intensity of what was expected to occur at this site. It is possible, or there is a possibility, that the unproven stormwater plan may impact Lamington Road also. As you know, the driveway comes down into Lamington Road, assuming the drainage is not captured the way it's supposed to do. As we're going to start to go into winter weather, that might turn out to be a problem. The site is not designed for tractor trailers. If one comes to the site for any reason, the best case scenario is that it will park on Lamington Road, which will not be good for anyone. We also suggested that inadequate proofs have been offered regarding firefighting. It is unlikely that fire engines will proceed on a road that can't support a tractor trailer. Moreover, the applicant offered no testimony regarding any review with the local volunteer fire company, and the plans do not show readily available exterior access to the northwest portion of the west building. The second prong of the negative criteria is the heart of a use variance. The ability for the applicant to reconcile or explain why the use should be allowed since the governing body chose to exclude it from the zone. The Supreme Court has told us in footnote 11 of the Medici case that the best way to reconcile a use is to show that the proposed use was unknown to the governing body at the time that the ordinance was created. This request is not new in any way. We certainly, the governing body is fully aware of what condominiums are or townhouses are. The governing body did not intend to have those type of facilities at this location. Finally, when you balance the positive and the negative, it is clear that this application should be denied. You probably know, but I will remind you that the courts give more deference to a denial than an approval because we favor development by planning rather than by variance. A few other issues to consider. One, the applicant is seeking a waiver of a tree table where the case relies heavily on the preservation, removal, and planting of new trees. Two, a final stormwater design has not been completed or approved. I recognize that most times a stormwater management plan will be successful, but at this point you don't know that. Three, the Historic Preservation Committee has not issued a certificate of appropriateness yet. We would add that the look of this building is not consistent with the character of Bedminster's village locations. We still don't know what the finishes will be. Four, this project provides minimum affordable housing required. Five, although one dwelling unit per lot is permitted in the VN zone, applicant is proposing 40 dwelling units on these lots. The height ordinance limits buildings to a maximum of 35 feet. The applicant is seeking a height of 42.68 for building 1, 49.43 for building 2. The proofs were woefully inadequate to prove that the site can accommodate this substantial increase. In particular, I think you can give little weight to the photo sims provided and question why more accurate photos were not provided. Normally, we're trying to accommodate a site. We look at the nature of the road, we look where there are other buildings similar in height to this, and they don't exist here. So there was no evidence really offered you about accommodation. The testimony failed to consider the impact on the steep slopes of this lot, despite the fact that Section 13-506 of the Bedminster Ordinance requires them to be preserved. This proposal has inadequate buffers. I mean, the applicant's been offering us trees the whole time, but what we've seen so far is not satisfactory to my client. Although the project will provide 40 smaller residential units, absolutely no recreational amenities are provided, and none that would serve the children that would wind up in these units. In accordance with Ordinance Section 13-405.5, one building may contain more than one use, provided that the total FAR and lot coverage of the combined uses does not exceed the maximum specified for commercial uses. The maximum FAR for commercial uses is 1.7. This proposal seeks 0.27 instead of 0.17. The D6 variance for height requires that the applicant show the proposal can accommodate the height in this case, and that is impossible because the west building will appear to be 78 feet in height from the easternmost portion of this property, which is grossly out of character with the neighborhood and the historic district. The bottom line is that this proposal is inconsistent with the VN zone, will have a substantial negative impact on the surrounding properties, and basically, that's what I like to refer to as 10 pounds of sand in a 5-pound bag, and that's why we're now trying to make an adjustment of the plan. Finally, the board is not allowed to change the zoning of this lot. Only the governing body can do that. But even they can't change a lot as small as an acreage, as small as this, in a way that will only benefit the applicant. That would be spot zoning. And I'm a little over 1,000 words, but I think that was the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the world's changed a little bit, not only over the past few decades, but over the past few years. People in general, including young professionals, empty nesters, and others, are looking for a convenient lifestyle where they can just put the key in the door, get the same type of amenities they might get at a single-family home, but without the headaches of home ownership and its attendant yet constant upkeep. The world is a more complex place and a more demanding place than many of us when we were young. People now are looking to rent as opposed to own, but demand certain amenities where they live, such as a lounge, a gym, and/or an exercise room. They all want a place to walk to, or like to, patronize the local shops, use the train station, and to socialize with others within the building. And my client proposes to meet those objectives. We believe that through professionals that have been testifying on our behalf, Mr. Checchio, we've answered all of your questions and have presented a substantially credible case for the approval of the variance relief sought, while at the same time satisfying the portion of your third round obligation to provide family rental housing. We believe through the very credible testimony of Mr. Rayenkamp and the other experts presented that we have demonstrated quite capably that the site is particularly suitable for the intended use. I don't think that Mr. Rayenkamp could have phrased it any better when he said, and I quote, "This is a site trying to find a use. This proposal is the one that provides that answer." We believe that Mr. Rayenkamp and the other experts presented by the applicant provide credible evidence that this site can accommodate the issues that are associated with a higher roof peak and a higher density. The alternatives to this proposal, which Mr. Rayenkamp discussed at length, should be and would be troubling to this board. While it is not my style to say that the objector's planner was not credible, it should be noted that she alleged certain things that, for example, a C1 stream crosses this property. I can assure you that, and you can confirm this with Mr. Ferrero, that there is no C1 waterway within 1/2 mile of the site. Moreover, she said that this application disrupts steep slopes under your ordinance. Well, that may be the case with other of these scenarios that Mr. Rayenkamp presented as alternatives to this project. It's not the case with this application. No steep slopes are being disturbed whatsoever. Not only that, we're providing a 250-foot at least landscape and tree buffer between the site and the Steeplechase neighborhood. Your ordinance only calls for at most 50 feet of landscape buffers. In summary, we offer this modified variance proposal and welcome returning to this board with a modified plan and architectural showing the modified plan which I have described. We appreciate your patience and ask for your approval of the variance relief requested. As mentioned, we are not seeking site plan approval this evening if the modified proposal is approved by this board. We're just asking that the same application number be retained so that we merely have to notice for a modified site plan approval. A couple of things that Mr. Galvin said that are just not true. Single-family homes would be more disruptive on this site than what is being proposed by the applicant. There would be retaining walls. There would be disruption into steep slopes, no doubt. He talks about the fact that the stormwater is not fully designed. That's not true. Mr. Ferrero had no issues with the stormwater design that was presented, and we will drill down on that some more to make sure that he's completely satisfied. Mr. Galvin testified about footnote 11 of the Medici case. And for those that are unfamiliar, and I don't want to be here lecturing you on the Medici case, because that's the job of your attorney. Footnote 11 says, these are the things that you should consider on a use variance that would make the reconciliation, why this use should be allowed when it's not permitted in the zone, allowable. And one of the things that Justice Stein said in the Medici case was that if the character of the area has substantially changed, Mr. Rayenkamp argued the converse. He said the village has been tired. It's tired. It hasn't really seen change over a substantial period of time. So Justice Stein recognized that change in character, and footnote 11 has been fully satisfied with respect to the reconciliation. He also said, Mr. Galvin, that we have waived the tree requirement. That's not true either. We're providing supplementation. We're not touching the tree line. We are adding trees to this application. He also said that a certificate of appropriateness has not been obtained from the Historic Preservation Commission. That's not true either. We did receive a certificate of appropriateness, and they were impressed with our plan. They just said, come back and we'll talk about materials and colors. And lastly, he said that it's your job not to rezone. I'm not asking you to rezone this property. That's what the job of the zoning board is to hear and decide applications in certain circumstances. A rezoning is the job of the governing body. Granted, but that's what a zoning board is for. And this is not a Dover versus Dover situation that your attorney can talk about, where we're changing the entire character of the entire zone district. That's not what this is about. We're taking a piece of property and we're asking you to allow use there. That makes sense. And with that said, I will sit down and let you deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we ask a question?
Yes, I don't see why not. Sure.
Yes.
Not the attorney, yeah.
Can you just review the changes that you want to make in the plan
Sure.
at the beginning? That you repeated at the beginning?
Well, first and foremost, my client would reduce the overall density on the site from 40 rental units to 33 rental units.
Jeff, can I just ask you, you would adjust the COA then? Or
sorry?
you would adjust the COA units as well, or not?
There would be 28 market rate units, and 5 of those would be,
5 COA.
Okay.
right.
28 market and 5.
5 COA, okay.
For a total of 33.
Mhm. Okay.
That's 15%, which is the requirement in the ordinance.
I understand. I didn't hear him mention that in the
Yeah,
in
I'm
the
sorry,
first.
that is accurate.
Okay.
The height, we're still seeking the same height that we saw.
Same height.
Right. We're seeking the use variance, that hasn't changed, to allow the use that's being proposed.
Adding 1,500 square feet.
I'll get to that.
Sorry.
We're granting the variance to exceed, which is really a bulk variance, and maybe that should be considered as part of a site plan, but it's a significant enough one. We did notice for it. You allow 5,000 square foot buildings, and ours are much larger than 5,000 square feet. So they may be changed, they will be changed when we come back for a modified site plan, but I can't tell you what those numbers will be, but it'll exceed 5,000 square feet.
Jeff, we can presume that the square footage would be somewhat linear, right? So if we're reducing the number of units from 40 to 33, and that's 18% reduction, the 80,000 square feet goes to 65,000 square feet or so. There's a relationship, I would think, between the units and the square footage.
Yes, there's some, I don't know if it's, should I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
Do you understand the question? I can
Yes.
try to restate.
So you're just melding 2 apartments together and calling it one?
We're not quite certain there would be a reduction in the overall square footage. I don't know that it would be perfectly linear. That's why we'll come back to you.
Approximate linear.
When we presented the application in the first instance, we did our pro formas based on 40 units with a 15% set aside as per the ordinance. We're really getting down to, based on the type of construction, based on our costs, based on the land, it's sort of the bare minimum. We really sharpened our pencils to get to this density. So we may make an effort to increase some of the unit sizes moderately. So we may offset the loss of density with some additional space or amenity space or something that may be income generative. If you understand, so I can't say that it would be perfectly linear. There will be a reduction.
The concern is exactly Kathy's concern, though. That's the concern.
The buildings are going to stay the same, the walls inside are going to shift.
That's not the case. We're certainly going to try to value engineer the project going forward. Tonight, we're just asking you to consider the variances that Jeff outlined. How it's going to actually play out on the site, the buildings aren't going to be exactly as they are. That's the case. I can't speak tonight to. That's why we're asking you to bifurcate the application so that we can dig into it, value engineer the buildings, and come back with something at a lesser density that still makes it's still a feasible project for us.
Okay. The other is to increase the retail, as Mr. Banishin mentioned, for an additional 1,500 square feet for a total. We had asked for 4,000. We're asking for 1,500 more to go to 5,500 total square feet. And lastly, we're asking the board to bifurcate to allow you to vote just on the variances, and we will do notice for the site plan aspect of this. And under Section 76B, we're required to do the negative criteria again on the return to site plan, which Mr. Collins will certainly talk to you about. But we're prepared to renotice for that, but we're asking you to vote on the variances.
Yes, Mr. Galvin?
I'm sorry, but again, I have to renew our objection to pushing this off. Even bifurcation is a decision that you have the right to make. It's not an automatic on the applicant's part. It's something they can request, but you don't have to grant it.
I
And I
understand.
think you have to take into the fact that the public's been here. We've spent our time and effort to do this. This is kind of late in the game to make the change. So we'd like you to make a decision. Thank you.
Tom, how do you think we should proceed at this point?
Well, if you have any questions for Frank, it's a good time, and then when you're ready, I propose a motion, and then we'd see how you propose a motion with some conditions, see whether you want to vote on it. And then, again, remember that in a D-variance case, all D-variance cases, the D-variance parts require a affirmative vote of 5 of the members eligible. There are 7 members eligible tonight, so that would be 5 out of 7 that would be required for the D variances. And a 4-3 vote on a D variance is called a statutory denial. It's not enough votes to carry a D variance.
Okay. Frank, what are your thoughts?
You may recall that in our review memorandum that was prepared some months ago, I think it was summer, August maybe, we identified the tests that need to be addressed here that you've dealt with many, many times in the past. I went back and looked through the record just to get my own sense of where we shake out on those questions, and I would just like to highlight for you what I think I heard as a guide to your decision. I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm telling you, based on the tests, here's what I heard, and then you can figure out for yourselves what that means to you and whether it warrants granting the variances. The specific nature of the use variance everybody has heard over and over is permitting an apartment building and a mixed use in an area where only either single-family detached uses or commercial uses or combinations of uses are permitted. So the apartment building is the offending part of this. Having other than single-family uses is the use variance aspect.
Frank, is your mic working?
Not, is it?
It's working, he should speak to matters.
Tell him, Tom.
I'll try to keep up with it. Thank you. So in terms of the positive criteria, I noted for you previously that the applicant's expert had to support the use variance by demonstrating that in a particular case and for special reasons, you can grant this variance. What I heard the applicant's planner say was that the size of the site, its location within the village, its connectedness to Bedminster Village, all made this site particularly suitable for the proposed use. As part of his support for his argument, he cited the county Phase 3 study with regard to the land use recommendations that the county has made over the last 4 or 5 years in a number of different iterations of that study, all of which have recommended increasing mixed use as a strategy to support village walkability and vitality. Those are also objectives that we have articulated, that Bedminster Township has articulated in your master plan re-examination, specifically calling attention to those types of uses. So we honed in on the fact that both the county and the township have identified these uses as appropriate. He also referred to your housing element and fair share plan, and I think we all recognize that part of our obligation under that plan is to find 29 additional family rental units, 5 of which would be provided by this project. Putting more residents in town and in a more pedestrian environment, I think, is clearly an objective of our plan that he cited as a reason to grant the variance. I think the objector's plan, his argument largely revolved around the use being too intense, and some of the the aspects of intensity that you would typically think would be offensive to residents would have noise or odor or any number of objectionable aspects to them that would be clearly impacting the residents. I was not sure that I could understand how she thought this use was intensive in a way that was going to impact the residents on Steeplechase, because candidly, I think, as you heard before, there is no zone in town that requires a 250-foot buffer. And to have a 250-foot wooded buffer as your rear yard between you and whatever use you find to be out of character, it may be out of character with Steeplechase Road, but it's really not in that neighborhood. So when I listened to Mr. Ryan Camp's testimony that 8 or more commercial buildings could be sprinkled around the site and multiple buildings could be 35 feet from the property line, I thought that if I were a resident in that neighborhood, it would be interesting to me to know that this particular application provides me something that probably no other applicant would ever consider doing, because they're giving away the use of half of the property. And granted, under these circumstances, it seems wise to do that. But if this application is approved, that 250-foot buffer becomes a permanent real thing. And additional landscaping is put between these houses and the development. So personally, I had a hard time not finding the applicant's planner to be compelling in his offering there. We also noted that there are 3 categories of special reasons. One would be whether it created an undue hardship. That's not alleged here. Another would be inherently beneficial uses, and that's not what we have here. And the third was when a proposed project carries out a purpose of zoning, and those were the purposes that were articulated by Mr. Ryan Camp, and specifically he said that NJSA 40:55D-2, which is the purpose section of the statute, had 3 specific parts he called your attention to. Section A, which is the broad general welfare section, essentially that seeks to advance the welfare of the community. He said was being advanced because the proposal specifically responds to local and county planning goals that have been articulated in the fairly recent past, 2015 to 2019. He also cited subsection G, which says seeks to provide a variety and choice of uses around town, and particularly of housing, and he noted that this would add a variety and choice of housing, including affordable units that are not now available in Bedminster Village. Under NJSA 45D2M, which seeks to promote the efficient use of land through the planning and zoning processes, he says this more efficient use of village land than the potential sprawling development that could convert this whole site to residential or commercial use and parking lots and put 35-foot high buildings 35 feet from the rear lot lines on Steeplechase, compared to this 250-foot buffer, means that this more efficient use of land both meets that test and provides external benefits because of the configuration. I did not hear the objector's planner challenge those specific purposes of the land use law that had been offered. With regard to the negative criteria, because we're going to await the site plan, the finalization of the site plan for discussion of the negative criteria, there are 2 parts to it. I think if you're going to grant the use variance, we should talk about the public good side of it, because I think that's an important thing to recognize. Mr. Ryan Camp's arguments would be that creating an opportunity like this to make more of a vital residential place out of Bedminster Village advances the public good, and that the arrangement on the property that keeps other development away from those neighbors on Steeplechase and provides this substantial buffer actually offers benefits that are also in the public good, which kind of it depends on what perspective you look at that from, and I'm not taking his position, I'm restating his position, if you will. Those are my comments on the use variance, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or help you with the discussion.
Board, any questions you have?
Frank, I have one question.
Yeah.
Mr. Galvin talked about one of the reasons to, I'm not
Speak
sure.
up a little bit, Rick.
I'm not sure I'm going to say this properly, but one of the reasons that you might consider a variance or to the zone plan or modification in the form of the variance was that there was some unknown reason, not apparent when the zone plan was approved, maybe suddenly apparent, maybe a site condition that was not known, or what. But does that extend to what Mr. Rinkamp started to allude to in terms of trends, in terms of housing? You talked a little bit about, demand for different types of housing,
I didn't-
the acknowledged need for variety. Would that fit the bill with respect to unknown changes in the demography, what have you?
They've evolved over a long enough period of time, and I think Mr. Galvin was more referring to an example where some use, you may think of any number of uses that didn't exist 10 years ago. All of a sudden, the last time you looked at the re-examination, nobody was doing that, and now there are those uses. That's the kind of specific case where it couldn't have been contemplated. But I think here, you're really looking at a situation where Bedminster's longstanding planning policies have been, we have a really nice town, we have an extremely low-density portion of our town, and we have a relatively highly developed corridor portion of town, and our planning seeks to keep that kind of arrangement, protect the rural areas so that they can stay that way, and assure that the highway corridor area can be a vital, important part of your town, which includes essentially all the commercial ratables. When we look at what's happening to commercial ratables up and down the interstate highway corridors, and the comments that we heard about James Hughes, who's the dean at Rutgers and who's produced any number of documentation pieces on the changing demographics, the fact that the millennials have now overtaken the baby boomers as the largest generation, and they will always be larger than us now because we're dying off quicker than they are. Hate to say it like that. But what he said was, they said, hey, listen, it hurts me more than anybody. What he's really saying is that you're looking at a housing opportunity that really meets some relatively unique needs of people who are now leaving at one point in their life the way they used to live for another place, but they want to stay in your town. And people who want to move to your town want to have, these are going to be luxury apartments other than the low and moderate income apartments are going to be awfully nice. So what that provides in your community is a place where a young person who ultimately will buy a house and live here later gets to kind of test drive the place and live in a highly amenitized environment and work at a great job, probably 20 minutes to half an hour in one direction or another on the highways. And together, those two groups, the baby boomers that are retiring and changing their domicile, and the millennials, will fill this place up overnight. I mean, the demand for this sort of housing not only is increasing because the millennials are increasingly getting older and household formation is increasing, but we're seeing that as the baby boomers keep aging, some of them are aging in place, but more than likely, they're going to make a housing choice different from the one that they've lived in most of their adult life if they've raised a family in their family home. So if you look around Bedminster for where can you find a place like this, the first response I hear all the time is, well, geez, we have over 3,000 multifamily units right down in Pluckerman, so what if we don't have any in Bedminster Village? And for years, one of the things we've talked about is the fact that there is one apartment complex in Bedminster Township where you can go and fill out an application and rent an apartment. And it's 50 senior units, and they're in Pluckerman Park in Pluckerman. But outside of that, there is no place where a purveyor of luxury apartments of the kind that we're seeing throughout the region now can provide that opportunity here in Bedminster. And typically, they do it on a much larger scale. Usually, we're talking about, if you want to look down a little ways down 202 in Bridgewater, you'll start to run into projects that have a couple of hundred units or more. So this is a really small project. The building is long and large compared to our iterative standard that we set up to try to keep the village scale small. By the same token, if you want mixed use, It doesn't come in 5,000 square foot packages. And these are not big buildings for multifamily housing, and in fact, because it's broken into two pieces, it's an even more accommodating kind of feeling to be friendly to the streetscape. So in a lot of different ways, as we look at what's different between when everybody thought the whole plan for Bedminster was keep as is, and now when we're talking about emerging demographic trends that mean maybe some changes are good in some places, that's part of what you have to weigh into. And that's what Mr. Reinkamp was testifying about, and that's what you have to weigh into your decision about this.
Sounds like they could have hired you, Frank.
Well, I'm not trying to offer any testimony on their behalf, but I do have to be...
It sounds like they could have hired you. It sounds like you're very pro this development.
I have encouraged you in the past to consider alternative... The reason Mr. Reinkamp was able to talk about our planning documents and cite these examples of why we've said these are appropriate things here is because that's what you have said in your planning documents. And I'm reminding you of that, but I'm not testifying for the applicant. They were voted on by the board.
But it seems like we could examine Bedminster in a larger picture to see more precisely where this kind of thing would fit in. Where there'd be better walking and mixed use and so forth. Other properties, I don't know that we've done that or said, this is where it should go.
Well, I heard the attorney for the applicant talk about all the good things about this development. And I don't disagree. I'm sure you would like to build your building. But in Bedminster, we have zoning. And the zoning that's in place, I think, should remain in place and be adhered to. I think this application is way too much.
I'm sorry.
In the 12 years I've been serving on boards in this town, I've never seen anything so out of place. And I think it's a zone breaker, and I think that this board should be very careful in how they vote. And I am pro Bedminster zoning, and I am pro doing what is best for the residents of Bedminster.
Ian, you have something you want to say?
Can we talk about the logistics of the applicant's request that we bifurcate the application? Because if we grant the variances...
Let me tell you what that means.
And then we have site plan approval, we've already given away the variance.
Not exactly.
So could we...
Here's how that works. The statute allows for it under Section 76B, as cited by Mr. Layer. I'm sorry.
Frank Brown.
Maybe it is a microphone.
Careful, Paul, you're going to be next.
So the statute allows for this. I don't know that you have done it recently, although it is a commonly used practice. And it is not what you said, Anna, because, in fact, the negative criteria continue, which is whether something it causes substantial detriment to the public good or a substantial impairment of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. That's the negative criteria of every variance, including every D or C variance. That, in an unusual way, because of the way the statute works, continues to attach to the future preliminary and final site plan, whereas most preliminary and final site plans consistent with an ordinance do not have the negative criteria because they do not have a variance. When you bifurcate, the negative criteria that are attached to the variances continues to attach, and you have to find it in the site plan, and if you don't find it, you can deny a site plan that's bifurcated from a variance.
You don't find it, right? You effectively deny.
That's right. So if you, and that's authorized by the statute, which says the negative criteria continue with the bifurcated site plan. Now, I'm not saying that it's not important that you might be granting the variances. That would be important, but that would be granted subject to, if you were to vote in favor of the variances in a bifurcated case, You are approving only the variance, is not the preliminary and final site plan, and you still have discretion on the preliminary and final site plan.
And so I think my question is that, is there a functional difference in our site plan review if we bifurcate and choose to approve tonight and then come back at some later date for final site plan approval, or if we deny today and the applicant refiles with this plan? Is there a substantive difference in those two future reviews?
If you deny today, they probably cannot come back with a similar plan because of res judicata. Okay? If you grant today with the 33-unit plan, subject to future site plan, bifurcated site plan, you could still deny the site plan. Okay?
So, and that
But
would
you
make it
would di-
unnecessary for us to add any further conditions to the
No,
reduction?
I'm not going to say that. You decide what conditions. And by the way, even if the applicant didn't propose this, I'm satisfied that in cases like this, the board has discretion to grant an approval with conditions that you want, even if the applicant didn't offer them. And I've told you that 100 times, and you know it, so.
So we would be able to approve, but say, okay, we want this number to be this.
Yes, you
We want
you
this
can
to be-
impose conditions on a grant of a variance, even that the applicant didn't request, and even that the objectors didn't seek, and that's your purview, not theirs. That doesn't mean they'll build it, it just means you granted it with conditions.
Just want to place an objection on the record. I think the world of Mr. Collins, but I disagree with some of the interpretation.
You know, we're in deliberation now.
I'm objecting, and I have to place my objection, so when we go to court, the judge will
Well,
be
I
able to see
don't,
my objection.
you should, go ahead, Mr.
Well,
Galvin and Mr. Lair, address any objection that you
I
want.
think there are appropriate cases where you would bifurcate. Say you were going to put a garage somewhere on the lot where you pretty much understood the case. But this is a substantial change in the case that you're reviewing. So you need to look at the entire project to make sure you're okay. And I disagree with counsel. I think you do lose leverage in this case if you grant this and subject to what's going to come in next. There's an understanding that you're going to approve what comes next. You don't have to. You could find that the plan as it comes is not good, but you are giving, in my opinion, and I would advise my boards, that you were giving up some leverage in that situation. Maybe that's appropriate. I don't think so. I don't think so in this case, and I don't think so based on the amount of the change that's being proposed. And we don't even know what they're really doing at this point. They're kind of saying it's going to still be the same two buildings, it's going to kind of be the same height. Those are some of the things that really disturbed us about this case. Not necessarily, we're not complaining primarily about the number of units. We're complaining about the bulk and massing and the impact on the zone.
So Tom, this is an objection to a
Well,
line of
it was-
questioning. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
You can ask as many questions of Mr. Galvin or Mr. Lair or me that you want to that are relevant to the matter, but I'm going to just say that was an objection with an argument. And I have to disagree with Mr. Galvin.
Respect.
The statute allows it, of course respectfully, but I do disagree, and so to the extent that my opinion is the opinion I give to you, and I'm telling you that I'm very experienced in it,
Very experienced.
that's
I
something
agree.
that I would urge you to rely upon, but I'd also urge you to respect that these are arguments by two counsel.
Mr. Collins, I would also ask...
Not objections.
Mr. Collins, you recognize that there are cases where the zoning board has said that they will not permit bifurcation because they needed the entire case to decide it.
I recognize that, but I also remember that you actually said that the board can make that decision. So, and I respect the board's authority to make any decisions the board wants to make.
So would we have to vote to bifurcate as a board?
When you vote to grant the variance without the site plan, you are bifurcating. Okay?
So
And you
if-
have the authority to do that
So
under the
if
statute.
we don't like that...
There is no case that says you can't do it. There is no case that says you can't bifurcate it. Mr. Galvin is just expressing his opinion.
No, there's a case that says.
They can
that
do it.
The board can
They
decide
can-
not to bifurcate it.
I didn't say that, Mr. Galvin. I said there's no case that says that the board can't bifurcate.
Oh, they can, I agree.
Yeah, you actually admitted that in your
I
prior
agree.
argument,
I
and you're
agree.
objecting and arguing why they shouldn't bifurcate it,
No,
not that they can't
It's a
bifurcate.
very poor idea to do it in this case.
Well, that's your
So,
opinion.
Yes,
Mr.
it
Collins suggested that the applicant would be barred by res judicata from refiling with a smaller,
We slightly disagree on that point, too.
and so your...
He agrees now, but he would
But he would
assert that.
argue the other issue applied.
All of my clients' rights, including...
Right, including res judicata, what is this?
Standing position that res judicata, you have to make some change to the application. The change that they're proposing to make here probably would survive a res judicata argument. And what I would advise my boards is to hear the case, even if res judicata would apply, and then you would turn it down again, and you would turn it down to res judicata also, because the courts want us to put the application on the record so they can read it. But my official position, the next time it comes through, will be that it's res judicata, even though you're probably going to hear it.
Just checking.
I don't even know what to say about that.
Just say
yes. First he said that you can bifurcate, then he said you really shouldn't, no, you can't, there's case law that says you can't. Of course you can. Of course you can. Mr. Collins, I agree with 100%. I've been a zoning board attorney for 16 years. I was a planning board attorney. You can bifurcate, you can do whatever you want. And I agree with Mr. Collins that the board has the right to do that. And yes, we have an obligation to come back and present site plan, and then we also have the added burden of the negative criteria on the site plan if we bifurcate.
Okay, so let's finish attorney arguments, and let's try to digest where we are. As I have explained to you in the past, one thing you can do, if you want to, is poll each other as to whether you have 5 persons willing to grant the approval. Another way, which we commonly do, and which is probably makes sense even here, is I would try to craft a motion of approval with conditions. If that does not pass by 5-person vote, the D variances are denied. Okay, and the rest of the case sort of falls apart because of that. So the one that I'm thinking of, or thinking for you to consider, but as I've always said to you, you can add additional conditions or change it, is a motion to approve the variances requested, and if any necessary other variances.
I don't know we're ready for that.
Okay, so that's up to you.
Yeah, I don't know that we're ready for that.
No.
I'd like to hear from some of the rest of my board members about what they're thinking before we
Okay,
even
let's-
begin to craft something.
Let's do that. Who wants to start? Do you want to start, Rich, or are you,
Yeah, I think I'm happy to start.
okay.
But I just have to remark, George, I have a lot of respect for you, but I think you're totally out of line to accuse Frank of...
I didn't accuse Frank of anything.
Let me finish, I'm talking now, please.
Fine.
Right?
But
You're basically accusing Frank of testifying on behalf of the opposition, or on the applicant, and that is unfair, unreasonable, and uncalled for. That said,
Well, maybe you
I
took
have,
two persons.
I have major concerns with this application from the beginning with respect to the density and the massing. When the architect was up, I was concerned about all of that. I tend to think of these propositions in the alternative. And I think the planner for the applicant made a very strong case that the alternatives for this site could in fact be more intense. Whether they put a peddler's village, as he described, with 5, 6, or 7 buildings spread across the property, with more parking, more circulation, more massing, higher buildings closer to the adjacent Steeplechase neighborhood, could be worse. If they were to build another Pluckerman Park on that site, it could be worse. For me, the site is blight. And there are 2 pieces of blighted property adjacent to the Steeplechase neighborhood that I think is not a good trend, and we need to address in some significant way. I think there's a lot of merit to this application. I think the efforts that they've made to create an extensive buffer. I think it's 269 feet to the edge of the first building from the property line, but almost 200 feet to the first point where they begin to disrupt the soil. To that first retaining wall is more than 200 feet. I think some of the issues that were raised with respect to stormwater will be more than satisfied. I'm totally confident in Paul's ability to make that happen. Paul, I actually have a couple of questions if I can confirm with you. The building on the corner of Hillside and Lamington Road, opposite the bank.
Yes.
Opposite Willie's or Delicious Heights.
Right.
That building's got to be 40 feet, 45 feet, correct?
I don't know.
It's at least 3 full stories plus a gable above the street,
Yes. Yes.
right? Okay.
It essentially has a walkout basement in the front.
And that's kind of what is happening here, I think. One of the things that I think the applicant's planner addressed is that if they put a 35-foot building on grade without excavating for the parking, which was done to minimize the lot coverage issues and the stormwater drainage and some of those other issues by minimizing the amount of hard surface and such, they could put a building that was 35 feet high, on grade, halfway up that slope, and it would be higher than what they're planning to do right now. So I appreciate the concession with respect to the reduction in the quantity of units. However, I would like to see them add further condition to the modification that the reduction in units is commensurate with the reduction in square footage, give or take 5 or 10%. You know, understand that it may not be a straight line proposition, but they should be able to get pretty close. I wouldn't like to see half of them be 3 bedrooms and more than half, or half of them be 2 bedrooms and a third of them be 3 bedrooms, and then the 1 bedrooms become fewer and fewer. I wouldn't like to see it just become the same massing issues that we have today in the final product. I'd like to see that addressed, because that's probably my biggest concern with this application. Last but not least, I think it does address some concerns that we raised a year and a half ago with our master plan review. The issue that Frank reiterated with respect to a variety of housing product is going to be addressed with this project. And Nick, to your point, I think, in my view, I think this is one of the best places in town to put this. Otherwise, what are we going to do? Put it in a hole on AT&T's property someplace that nobody would want to live in any place? It wouldn't add any village vibrancy that we've been talking about, et cetera, et cetera. You know, if it's not on Main Street, which is presumably the most heavily trafficked street in town, if it's not on 206, where is it? That said, I'm only in favor of the project as a result of the reduction. If they came here tonight without any change in and I've been waiting, frankly, you know, that this seemed obvious to me back in August. This project needed to be reduced. But appreciate the fact that they reduced it, and I'm in favor of it as long as it's reduced. But if there were 1 more unit larger, I wouldn't have an appetite for it. That's my position.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to, Nick?
Well, I still have a problem with the change of use in that zone. The apartment building seems kind of completely out of character with the rest of the street there. So that's one issue I've got. Another is sort of associated with that, we only allow 5,000 square feet as the maximum building size. And right now the plan is about 30,000 square feet, you know, 6 times what the zone calls for. Now that would be reduced apparently the recently proposed plan, but again, we don't know the details. And it doesn't seem to me to be enough of a change to substantially change the view from the street of Lamington Road, of this sort of towering building. I do agree we need to keep up with the times. I don't see that particular section of town where people walk there now for any reason. I don't know, people sort of drive to the drugstore or wherever and leave. I don't see much mingling going on, so I don't know how much that would add. So I'm just thinking that there could be other places that are better, but I don't have specifics. So those are my comments at this time.
So I think that outside of our master planning role, we don't get to pick and choose what applications come on what sites. It's not like we can tell this applicant, we love your application, but it'd be great if you could put it like, 3 lots down the street. We have to take what comes before us. I think they have done a notable job of trying to make this application palatable. They've tried to keep a lot of the site undisturbed. They have a very large buffer on the back for the residents. I know the residents don't think it's large enough, but it's a large buffer. I agree with Rich, and I think a lot of the board members, that the plans that we saw are very dense. And there's a lot of massing, and those buildings are big. But the project itself accomplishes a lot of things that we have said we wanted to foster in town. That people aren't walking in that neighborhood is a result of what's in that neighborhood at the moment. If we don't change what's there, that won't evolve. And so I wish they had brought us plans with a reduction sooner so we could see buildings and actually make a determination. But the project in concept, I think, is something that we've invited as a town.
And I have to agree with what you're saying. And what's worrisome to me is the bifurcation of just saying, yes, we're going to approve these numbers. And then, my concern is that I'm okay with the apartment being in that area and the mixed use, and I understand that the town does need to make some changes, but to be of this size is not what I think should be right there in that spot. Okay, I think it's very, very large, and I'm personally concerned that the height in particular, is so much higher. It's going to be a very large building from there. So I mean, I know there needs to be some changes, but it's a little scary approving, sure, they can have the height, sure, they can have this, sure, they can have that, but we don't know what it's going to be like. Is there a way to say, no, we're not going to approve this, but we want that you can come back and show us what you want? Is that something that's allowable?
Not really.
No.
You guys let me carry their pace to revise plans. You can't say no and hear it. And once you say no to the D variance, it's over.
But do we have to vote?
No, you don't have to bifurcate. If you said, I need to see the plans before I can say yes or no, you have a right to decide that too.
That might be just how I feel. I haven't spoken to anybody else, but it's a matter of, they've made a lot of changes right now. Like all of a sudden this retail is going to be larger. The units are going to be smaller. The height is still the same height. I still have a lot of questions, so I don't know where to go with this.
So my inclination is I'm less concerned. I'm concerned about the appearance of the building from the street, But they
Absolutely.
could lop off the gabled roof, the peaked roof.
Yeah.
And it would meet the height variance. And
But
it
it
would not be very pretty.
It's not.
Right,
not-
so I would rather have the aesthetic of a building that had the same shape as the buildings in the village, even if it meant a height variance for something that conformed to our statute as written, but was, quite frankly, ugly.
Yeah, without that gabled roof,
Without
it's
the
awful.
peaked roof, it's awful. And so I'm less concerned about the height variance than I am about the sort of massing is the only word that works, right? That just sort of looming building.
And without the top floor, it
I
might
don't
meet-
think it would be. Because it's peaked,
No. Take away the second or third floor where it's called. It's a shorter,
right, but
The peak-
just changing whether or not they get a height variance
I'm
doesn't
saying,
necessarily have them remove the second
The use-
floor. They could remove the peaked roof.
no, I'm just saying, you could keep the peaked roof for appearance sake and lower the whole thing by removing one of the floors.
They could, but we have no way to mandate that.
No, I
Could
mean,
could I just add that when you
we
think
could,
about...
but it may not be
when you think about the
financially
fact-
viable.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk over you. When you think about the fact that this has structured parking, so that part of the footprint of this development has been shrunken into the building, so that very little parking is now surface parking, I mean, that's part of the reason for the height. I think Mr. Reinkamp said that, maybe I didn't repeat it before, but if you're wondering why you would end up at that height, and you look at what's going in, look from the side profile of what's going into the building, it's not like it's not a three-story, there are 3 residential floors.
I think that was my point, Nick, because they can put a 2.5-story building on grade,
And make
create more parking
Right.
field,
Mhm.
and accommodate our height requirement.
And
But it
still
would be
looks
at
nice.
but it would be at the expense of more of an encroachment on the buffer, more of an encroachment, more
Yeah.
lot
Buildings would
coverage.
look functional at the
Surface
same time.
parking.
So I was just saying, keep the parking there and have fewer apartments by eliminating a floor.
Take the 7 apartments out of the second floor of the largest building. That's
Well, that's one way to look at it.
that's what you were.
What are we going to do? In 15 minutes, we're going to redo the whole application? I just don't get it. I'm confused, I don't know what's going on, bifurcate this, we're going to chop off this. I mean, look, this is insane in my eyes. I think our zoning is fine the way it is. I mean, the way I see it, Frank talks about the people keep it as it is, and then, well, no, you can't keep it as it is, you got to go with the times. Well, I agree, I agree, keep it as it is, but I like going with the times too. But I don't think this is the right project for this parcel. I don't think we have to settle for this. I think there can be something better there, and I think our zoning is fine.
So George,
Yes.
our job as a zoning board is to hear these applications on a regular basis.
Correct.
Every application we hear is a variation to our zoning ordinance. Yes? I mean, by definition.
I'm listening.
I'm asking for you to
I'm not, I'm just going to listen.
understand, acknowledge that fact in the universe.
Well, I mean, I think we're talking about a D variance here. This is a use variance.
Right, but we have
So for
defenses all the
60,
time.
50, 40 years, in this town, the people that have sat here before us have determined, in their eyes, what's best for the town. And I think it's a pretty nice town.
I agree, that's why we live here.
And look, when
I'm not saying you have to like this application, for sure. There are lots of reasons not to like this particular application.
Right.
But I
Look, I
don't-
think the zoning is fine. That's the answer to your question.
But if the zoning is fine,
Right.
then don't we then by definition just deny every D variance that comes before us?
No.
Because we like
No,
our
because certain
zoning?
variances make sense. certain people. Look, everybody has their own opinion, and I respect your opinion, and I respect Rich's and everybody. But it's our job up here to represent the residents of this town. And look, I've only lived here since '04, okay? But I love this town. And I don't think putting an apartment building in that location, that size, is the right thing for the town. And that's just the bottom line. Okay, sure, you can make an argument for the developer that it's, oh yes, the trends, and it's fine. I get it, you're right. But put it someplace else. Don't come and break our zoning in Bedminster. Oh, and that's how I see it. Okay?
Anybody else on the board like to make a comment?
Tom, with regard to the bifurcation, if we approve the variances and the site plan comes before us again, and it's still, there's so much dissent among the board, we have an opportunity then to say no?
Yeah. That's what bifurcation with the negative criteria means. That's what the negative criteria
I
gives
just
you.
don't see how we can shut these guys out and not listen to what they're proposing to change. I mean, I don't love the size of it either, but if they could make it more appealing somehow, so that we could all kind of look at this and say, you know what, maybe this could work. I would love to be able to have an opportunity to see what they're talking about.
But in order to get to that spot, we have to approve the height, we have to approve...
Well, but it's conditional,
we have
and
to
the
approve
height,
all this.
I don't feel like the height is the biggest issue, as opposed to just the hugeness of the length of both of those buildings.
And
Yeah, well, the
We're
presence on the
approve it.
street is what I'm talking about. Well, the approval is conditional, and if we don't like what they come back with, we get to say no.
I think that's wrong.
But if we deny them, they might be shut out for good.
Well, but that's, look,
Yeah, I'm just,
that's the, put on your big boy pants. I mean, I don't know what else to
That's my
say.
application.
But George, the option is to leave it the way it is.
No, no, it's not.
Hear me out. Because I'm sure you don't like to be interrupted any more than I do. Hear me out. The option is, the alternative is to leave it the way it is, indefinitely. And when I say...
I mean, are you the owner of the property?
They're the owner of the property.
Okay, well then don't tell me what somebody else is gonna do with their property, Rich.
I can tell you what somebody's going to do with their property. The guy behind me has been trying to sell his house for 8 years. He can't sell it. That property that we're talking about has been abandoned for as long as I can remember, at least 10 years. And the option is to do nothing, and it remains blight. And you know what? Blight begets blight.
Then vote yes.
Well, and I may.
Well,
But
that's up to you.
But if we look at it in terms of the alternative, what are the options may not be
I
good.
mean, look, I think what Scott just said makes sense. So what Scott said makes sense. But how do you get there? You know, we need a magician up here.
Well,
Tell
I
us
think
how.
I think we can add some
I think we
sensible
get there.
conditions. I think we can add some sensible conditions to what they come back with.
I don't think you can approve anything tonight with this change. Look, this is such an important application, and you're gonna just boom, boom. What just happened?
So-
We walk out of here and it's over. That's what's gonna happen.
It's not over. You said you agreed with Scott. You just said you agreed with Scott.
No, but I'm just saying, if you give all sorts of approvals tonight, but I didn't say I wasn't referring to what Scott said, approve it. What I was
Scott didn't say
referring to.
approve it.
how
Said-
you get to
Scott
the point
suggested
to
that
let
we
them
reserved
come
our
back.
rights
No,
to look at the-
Scott said, let them come back with, you know, it makes sense to look at if they're gonna change. That makes sense.
Maybe
But
it
not
makes
to
more
approve it,
sense
and then
to
they
put the
come
vote off until they can...
That makes sense.
Is there a way to do this without a response tonight?
You do not have to vote on anything tonight. If you want to have them come back and show you what we're talking about now,
I just
and
feel
then
like
vote.
that's going to be the fairest outcome tonight, because we just don't know what the heck we're voting on. I'm not comfortable with it.
And you're not supposed to be asked to vote on something that you just don't know enough about to feel good about.
Okay, well, fair enough then. I don't want to feel that pressure that I have to come up with an answer tonight when I don't have all the facts.
I think, Tom,
Yeah,
we've
so it
heard
sounds
enough
like- it
from
sounds
the
like
board.
you'd like
I
to-
think
so
that...
You should ask that Mr. Lair if they'll carried to a date certain
Okay.
with revised
Well,
plans.
I just have a question.
Yes.
The concept of bifurcation, and I disagree with you wholeheartedly, the concept of
I would
bifurcation
expect you
means
to disagree
that-
with
that
me.
you can
You're the
come back.
attorney for the
Let me
applicant.
finish, please.
Go ahead.
Which means that I have the right to come back. You have the right to say no to my site plan if you don't like it. You have the right to say the condition that Mr. Travellini imposed is a legitimate condition. And he said, you have to, if you're going to do a reduction, then you have to do a commensurate reduction in your square footage. That's a reasonable condition. You can impose those conditions. I have to come back and show you a site plan that you can live with. If you don't like it, then vote no. All I'm saying to you is, we're asking for a use, a height, and the variance to allow the use. We have to come back to you and show you a plan that you're satisfied with and show you that there'll be no impairment to the zoning plan, no detriment to the surrounding community. I have to still do that. That's what Mr. Collins said. I still have to show you a plan. I'm just not understanding what, on the one hand, you're supporting the concept, but on the other hand, you're saying, what are we doing here tonight?
Mr. Lair, hang on a second, please. I think what the board is trying to say, and what I've heard a lot from the board members, is that they've heard an application where they see, some of them see particular merit, but without seeing more of the details of what it is they're approving, they feel like they can't really be asked to approve something tonight.
From my client's point of view, he doesn't know if you're going to grant the use, so he's going to spend more money for the chance that he gets a use variance, and if you give him the use, he'll come back and satisfy your concerns about the site plan. The massing issue, I don't get the sense that the height issue is the problem, but that the massing is the issue. We understand, we're hearing it. We're hearing it. I'm just saying to you that why put my client through that obligation when he doesn't even know if you're going to be approving the use? And that's really the concern.
May I be heard?
Yes, go right ahead.
I looked at this from day one and said I thought that some other applicant would reduce the size of the project. Why did they drag this all the way to this point? And at the 11th hour, they're asking, they're bleeding the public and the public's effort to try to wear us down. And so I think you have to be mindful of that sometimes you have to pull the trigger and make a decision. They're not dead in the water if you turn them down, if they still think they have viability. I've heard positive comments. I'm not agreeing, but I've heard positive comments. If I'm a developer, you make a decision. If you feel strongly enough about it, you come back, you start the process over, you pay your monies, you get to come back. And then we'll have a fresh start to come in and present our case. At this point in time, the case has been presented. And if there was nobody in this room and nobody cared, might be an okay alternative to carry tonight. It's not fair to us to do that.
Tom, is it possible that we approve, the use only?
Yes.
So that...
You write the variances in part, but it's
So
just
that-
as easy. It sounds, Madam Chairman, like the majority of the board, at least, and maybe even 5 members would like, some of the 5 would like to see the revised plans before you vote.
I
So, and
understand.
you seem to feel that way, so that's an easier,
Well, what I'm saying
and
is
more,
if we approve the use, in other words, the apartment
I understand.
concept of it with the rental of commercial property, that would be just the use versus any site plan issues that might go on. Would that be a possible?
That's what bifurcation means.
Exactly.
I don't mean to.
I know, I
be flip,
understand
but
that.
that's
But
exactly
he's
what that
adding
means.
other issues that are, like, for instance, the height. So can we do it on the use?
Well, that is
only?
one of the Ds. The height is a D.
Okay.
You could break apart the variances and just vote on the use variance, which is also probably it's not really a density variance, but it is the change in the use
Correct.
to an apartment building. A mixed use is allowed.
Yes, right.
And interesting enough, an apartment in a mixed-use building, one apartment in each mixed-use building is actually allowed in the ordinance.
Right.
So a mixed-use building with an apartment is actually allowed. It's a little unclear, but it is allowed. But that's a 5,000 square foot or less building.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to be on a second floor. So you've had some of those. You know, based on what you've heard so far, and what the reaction I'm observing of you, and Frank is feeling the same way, it probably is that you would like to get enough of you would like to get the architecturals and the site plan revisions before you make your vote.
I think it
That's
would be
fairer.
better.
That's fairer to the applicant, it's fairer to the public. I don't agree with Mr. Galvin that you have to vote no and then make them come back. And res judicata would attach unless there was a substantial change. And I can tell you that the litigation over what is a substantial change is litigation you don't want to be in. So, and I don't want to be in. So, because it's debatable all kinds of ways what substantial changes. So, my read of your majority is to ask the applicant, Mr. Layer, to confirm with his client that they'll extend to a date certain, get the hearing carried to that date, that's no prejudice to anyone, and just like you do in every other
Just seems fair.
site plan that you're concerned about.
Okay. Okay, you want to,
So maybe they want to take a 5-minute break.
you want to take a
and they can
5-minute
talk to
break?
one another and they
Mr.
can
Lair,
get
is
a
that all right
schedule
with you?
going.
5 minutes, talk to your client?
Please.
Okay, 5 minutes. 1 second, we're not on, okay.
Is the question really about the massing? Because I'm gonna give you an answer, but is the real issue the massing of the building?
It sounds to me that that's what is the problem. It's a combination of the height and the massiveness. It just seems that it's large for the streetscape. Let me say it that way. Okay?
Yep.
Yes.
And then, so what I would do is it really wouldn't be a bifurcation. I would be coming back for a date certain with essentially a revised site plan. And that's
Okay.
what you want to see.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that would make the board very comfortable then.
Yeah.
Okay.
More
So-
comfortable.
More comfortable, yes, yes.
So the date is, I understand the 2nd or 3rd?
Well, we have the second meeting in January. That's
Well,
January
Madam
9th.
Chair, if I would
Excuse me.
suggest, I would go into February. We obviously can't do this at the reorganization meeting, and I think we only have one meeting in January.
I know we do, yes,
And
exactly.
Paul does really need the plans about 21 days before.
That's
the
true, we do need
meeting
time
scheduled so he can do
to
his review
revise
report.
plans. So I guess that does make everybody feel more comfortable.
And the dates are February, the second meeting in February is the 13th. I don't know, with the holidays coming up, I don't know when you might be able to get the stuff done.
Second, that would be the 13th of February.
Okay,
That's fine.
all right. That's,
Okay, so,
that's what we're going to go then?
Yes. And so, Mr. Blair, would you extend the time deadline for action to the end of February, just in case of snow or something like that?
That's okay? Yes. Yes.
Okay, so February 13th, so this matter, the chair will confirm it, but the matter of the Edith properties will be carried without additional notices to February 13th, 2020, with revised plans to be submitted at least 21 days before the hearing.
Just to be clear, we've completed the use variance portion of the case. The
Okay,
case has been closed, we've had deliberation, now I'm coming back for site plan, and I have to prove the negative criteria. I just want to make sure that that's what we're talking about, because I'm not bifurcating, but I
I
am coming
understand.
back for my site plan.
Please explain what he just said. It's very straightforward. The hearing is continued until February 13th, 2020, to review revised site plan. Now, nothing is being decided tonight.
Right.
Thank
That's
you.
fine.
The objectors reserve our right to cross-examine and put additional witnesses in based on the new information.
It's not debatable. He has that right.
yeah, I understand that, yes,
I mean,
okay.
that's an objection. But
At this time, I don't know who your witnesses might be, if you're going to call everyone back, as far as, not your planner necessarily, but your engineer.
they'll figure that out.
You'll figure that out, your engineer and architect, I assume, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. And
Next
I
holiday,
thank
please.
you for listening to the board. We appreciate that, we do.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, happy
Okay,
holidays.
And to you.
have a good holiday, yes.
And you.
We're going to have an executive session, so just hold tight.
Do you have any other business?
Yes, we're going to have an executive session. Lou's coming to join us.
Lou's back.
Lou is back.
Yeah, you can share.
Well, we'll close this portion of the meeting. Do we close it completely, or we have?
Well, we're going to do a motion to go into executive session.
Executive
We're still in the
session.
meeting right now.
Okay.
So let's let people leave because we probably stay in this room if we can lock that door.
Okay.
We're going to go into closed session after people have left.
Don't have to tell my husband.
You have to run?
Tell my
Oh.
husband to leave.
Well, after we make the motion to go into closed, in open session, then we'd ask people to formally leave.
Yeah.
Motion.
So it's it's a resolution, it's pretty complicated, actually. A motion on a resolution to go into closed or executive session pursuant to Section 7 and 8 of the Open Public Meetings Act to discuss matters of personnel matters and contract negotiations, the matters to be revealed to the public upon the completion of all litigation and appeals and the removal of the need for confidentiality. Is there such a motion on such a resolution to go into closed session?
So moved.
So we have a couple. So Anna maybe, and then Scott as a second. And a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Stratton?
Aye.
Mr. Griffin?
Aye.
Mr. Cornelius?
Yes.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. DeGiorgio?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Travellini?
Aye.
Ms. Pappas?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Aye.
And now we'll ask for all members of the public, including spouses, to leave the room, please. We get to talk about you.
Bye, Jim.
Especially Yana, Nico.
It's part of the contract negotiation.
We'll call her a new bid.
But you can wait in the other room. I hope we're not
Just
too
a couple
long.
minutes, just a few minutes. Warm up the car.
Oh.
For honey.
And we can turn off the video and the tape recording and just keep skin, and it's, Janine, that means,
So I'm officially done, I can turn it off the rest of the night or call.
that's right, well, pause it because when you go back into open, you put it back on. Now and we're,
Back in session at 8.
Okay, so now we just need a motion to close tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Have a wonderful Christmas, everybody.
Happy holidays.
New Year.
Eat too much, drink too much, laugh too much, all that stuff.
Happy Hanukkah. All of
It's
the
our New Year.
they were
Okay.